Okay, hello again. Welcome to another session of C programming. Sorry I haven't posted in a while. I was taking care of a few things. But anyway, so in our last session, we looked at taking user input, right? Using the scanf statement. A very important thing that you have to, know when programming. So in this particular course, on this particular session, we'll learn something called conditional statements, right? You'd better know them as if else. Sorry. So basically, how to take decisions in a program and then control how the program behaves, right? So it's under a general topic we tend to call control structures, because you are controlling the flow of the program. Okay, so let's go into our code blocks and see what we'll be doing today. So we'll start by looking at what are conditional statements and why they are necessary. We'll look at something called the if-else structure. Sorry. We'll look at how to create simple conditions using relational operators. We'll look at how to combine the simple relations to form compound conditions. Simple conditions to form compound conditions using logical operators. And then we'll also look at an extended version of the if-else called the if-else, right? And then we'll take an example to wrap things up for this video. Okay, so let's start. What are conditional statements, right? So let me make a statement like this. If you have an internet connection, you can watch this video, right? So let's just type it out there and see what we have. So if you have an internet connection, you can watch this video. Right? So this is an example of a conditional statement, right? Because you are seeing that it starts with an if, and then there's a condition that needs to check out before you can actually watch this video, right? So the condition here is you have if the whole internet connection, right? So if the condition is true, then basically what follows after that can also occur. So if I have an internet connection, I can watch this video, right? So this is what a conditional statement is. It's simply a statement that can evaluate to true or false. Sorry. Okay, so the same way we had, that's what we have for conditional statements, right? So now the same way we said it, like if you have an internet connection, you can watch this video. That's exactly how you'd type it in the program, right? You start with some if statements, and then you state your condition, and then you specify what happens if the condition is true. So note the syntax. We have an if statement here. So whatever condition you want to check goes into parentheses over here, right? And then in braces you put what you want to happen if that condition evaluates to true, right? So if the condition also evaluates to false, you can actually put an else part there as well. Sorry. So the else part will happen what happens if the condition is false. So I hope we get it. So looking at the example we had previously, if the condition is true, you can watch a video, else you cannot watch a video. I hope this makes sense of the whole conditional statement. It's just a way of evaluating a condition and then taking a decision based on that condition, right? So everything that happens is whether this condition evaluates to true or false. So the first block, which is in between these braces, what happens if the condition is true? So the second part is the else part, which also has braces, right? So this side also what happens if the condition is false. Okay, so we've seen what conditional statements are. We've seen the if-else structure, right? So now let's come to creating simple conditions using what we call the relational operators, right? Okay. So when we talk about relational operators, we are talking about those comparisons that can either evaluate to true or false, right? So if we talk about relational operators, yeah, operators. So we are looking at things like is equal to, right? Is greater than, so conversely we have is less than. We have greater than or equal to. We have is less than or equal to, or is not equal to as well. That's another relational operator that we have. So if we talk about relational operator, these are simply what we are talking about. These are the statements that I can write that can either relate to or evaluate to true or false, right? So if it is equal to, the opposite will be is not equal to, right? If it's greater than, the opposite is less than. If it's greater than or equal to, you can think of the opposite of it as is less than or equal to, right? So each of this has its corresponding symbol that it uses in the program. So anytime you want to use or want to compare whether two values are equal, right, we use the is equal to, and we denote that one by a double equal to sign. So not a single one. A single one means you are assigning or you are doing an assignment of a variable. We use the double equal to represent is equal to, right? So with is greater than, we also have greater than, and then we have the equal to symbol then. So that's how I would write it in the program. So let's see how the other ones will also go. Oops, sorry, this is greater than, so it's just this. It's greater than or equal to that has that. Yeah, so sorry for the error there. So it's less than, we also have something similar, right? And then it's not equal to, we have the exclamation mark and then the equal to. So these are the relational operators that we have in programming, right? So I'm just going to take this part out, so we'll come back to it later. Agreed? So anytime I want to perform some comparison, these are the 6 operators that I can use. So it's equal to, it's greater than, it's less than, it's greater than or equal to, it's less than or equal to, it's not equal to, right? So this is what we mean by the relational operators. And relational operators are what we use to create conditions in programming. So let's take an example, right? Let's declare a variable called var1 as an integer and give it a value of 10. So now I want to, let's say I wanted to write a program that checks if the value of var1 is greater than 10. If it's greater, I should print out true. If it's not greater, I should print out false, right? So we saw the structure of the if, which we'll do again. So we have our if. We know that our condition goes within the parentheses, and then the statement that should happen. So what happens if true, or if condition is true, right? And then the else part is what happens if the condition is false or not true. So this is the structure that we said we have. So now the whole thing is that we want to check if var1 is greater than 10. If it is, then we print out true. If not, we print out false. So with our condition, we've seen that we want to check if it is greater than. That means we are looking at this symbol. So I'll write var1 greater than 10. I hope it's clear. So if the value of var1 is greater than this value over here, so what happens if this condition is true is that I want to print out true, right? Else, if it is false, I want to print out false, right? So condition, what happens if it's true and what happens if it's false. Okay, so let's run this program and see what the output will be. So if we see the output, we can see that we have false, right? Because the condition was to check if var1 was greater than 10, but var1 was equal to 10. If we go back to our code, sorry, right, it was equal to 10, so that makes the condition false. So that means it's going to run whatever is in the else block. So when the program reaches here, it takes a decision, or you're asking it to take a decision based on what this condition evaluates to, right? So that means if it prints out, if it is true, it is only going to do what is in the if block. It's going to ignore what is in anything that is inside the else block, or in other words, these braces over here. Likewise, if it's false, vice versa. So I hope it's clear. That's how we create the conditions, right? So now let's do a different condition. Let's check if the value of var1 is greater than or equal to 10. So in that case, I would simply put that over here, right? So obviously we expect that this should be true because the condition is greater than or equal to, and var1 has a value of 10, so we expect that this should be true. So let's run this also and then see what we get. So we can see that yes, indeed, we get the value of true, right? Because the condition there is true. So I hope the relational operators and creating variables is clear. So let's go back to our code. Okay, so when you see something like this, these are simple conditions, right? Because they only have one part or one condition in them. So sometimes we may want to create compound conditions, or in other words, multiple conditions linked together, right? Sorry. So an example is, let's take the example that we started with initially. So if you have an internet connection and you have let me see, access to, let's just say access to YouTube, comma, you can watch this video, right? So now let's deconstruct what we have here. So now you can see here we have two conditions. So the first one is to have an internet connection, and the second one is also to have a YouTube, or to have YouTube access, right? So you can see that the thing that is linking them is this AND statement here. So we have one condition here, we have another condition here, and we have something linking them, which is the AND, right? So this is basically a compound statement, or a compound condition, a condition that has more than one part, basically, right? So anytime you want to create such conditions, the key words you are looking for is this, or the one that is linking them, right? So I can either have AND statement or the AND keyword, or we can have the OR as well. So in this case, to read, if you have an internet connection or you have access to YouTube, you can watch this video, right? So these words that link them, these are what we refer to as the logical operators. Okay. Right. So logical operators are used to link conditions to form compound conditions. So while the relational operators are used to actually create the simple conditions, right? So we saw that some of the keywords that we use are how do you call it? The AND statements. The second one that we saw was the OR, right? So these are the two primary logical operators that are used in forming conditions. So with the AND statement, or the AND keyword, it is represented by a double ampersand. So not a single one, because in the taking input video we saw that the single one is the memory address operator. So it's actually a double ampersand we use to represent the AND, not a single ampersand. Okay. And with the OR statement we use a double pipe symbol, right? These straight lines, it's not an L, this is an L, but this is a pipe, right? A pipe character. That is what we use to create the the or statement. So normally this key or this character is found on the key that has the backslash with it, right? So if you press shift plus backslash, you should get a pipe. So this is the normal backslash and this is the pipe symbol by pressing shift, right? So let me just put this there. So shift plus backslash, that is how you get a pipe character. Okay, so you must remember to use two of them. Using one of them denotes something else, actually, which we call bitwise operations, but that is not the focus of this video. So we have logical operators as the ones or the keywords that link conditions to form bigger ones or to form compound conditions. And we've seen that we can use the and, which is a double ampersand, or the or, which is a double pipe, right? Okay, so we are still going to use this variable var1 to demonstrate the logical operators. Now let's write multiple conditions. So if, let's say, var1, right, so this time we are checking whether it is equal to 10 and var1 is, let's say, less than 10, right? So now let's analyze the logical operators, how they work. Anytime you're using the AND logical operator, right, what this translates to is that each of the individual conditions must evaluate to true for the whole thing to also be true, right? So let's just put it over here. So the AND keyword, all conditions or all simple conditions must be true. So it's a must that they have to be true for the entire compound condition to also be true. So I hope we get it. So even if you have 100 simple conditions and you've linked them with ANDs, if one of them is false, that means the whole thing is also going to become false. So that's how the AND works, right? So now let's come back over here. So we are saying that if var1 is equal to 10 and var2 or var1 is also less than 10, right? So we obviously know that this side is going to be true because the value of var1 is actually 10. But this side is not going to be true because 10 is not less than 10. I hope it's clear. So over here we are still going to printf, or we are still going to print out compound true. Right, so if this is false, then we print out also compound false. Agreed? So let's run this and then see what we have. So we can see that we have compound false, right? So I hope you know why we are getting this. Let's go back to the code. In the code, we saw that one part of the AND statement or the AND condition was true and the other part was false. And with the AND, we said that all the simple conditions must be true for the entire compound statement or condition to also be true. So since this one was false, that means the whole thing became false, and then it executed what was in the else part, right? So when using conditional statement if else, the key is in knowing how to build your conditions, right? Knowing where to use brackets, knowing where to use relational operators, or how do you call it, logical operators. So I trust that this is clear, right? So we've seen conditional statements, we've seen if else structures, we've seen creating simple conditions with relational operators, we've seen forming compound conditions with logical operators, right? So let's also look at this if else. So this is not two if else written together, it's actually if there's an if part, then there's an else if part, then there's also an else part, right? So this is like any typical conversation you're having. So if I make the statement, if it rains today, I will stay indoors. Else, if it is cloudy, I'll watch television. Else, I'll go out and play. Right? So let's put that statement down into writing and see what we have. So if it is raining, right, I'll how do you call? Let's just say I'll sleep. Else, if it is cloudy, right, I'll watch television. Else, I'll go out and play. Sorry for the background noise, my dogs are howling again, so sorry if it interrupts your concentration. Okay, so if it's raining, I'll sleep, right? Else, if it is cloudy, I'll watch television. Else, I'll go out and play. So with the normal if else, right, we have particularly just two paths we can take. If this condition is true, then evaluate this, else evaluate that, right? But what if you have more than two conditions? That is when we use the if else, right? So you can, if takes one condition, else, or the else ifs will also take the other condition. So if none of them are true, then it will come and execute the else statement, right? So we can have multiple else if statements, the same way you can speak multiple else if statements, right? So you have something like this. So if it is snowing, which is impossible in Ghana, let's just say I'll take selfies. Let's something like that. Right. So we can have multiple. I don't have another condition, so we'll just leave it here. We can have multiple else if statements, and then if none of those conditions are true, then the program would execute whatever is in the else block, right? So we can have an if statement standing alone actually. So I could have just done, for example, I could just do this if statement standing alone without an else. This is valid, but you cannot have an else without an if. It's only the if statement that can, or the if block, that can stand alone, right? But else statements cannot exist without an if. So if let's say I took this out, if I just try to do this and I run it, you can see that immediately we have an error on line 50, because an else block cannot stand alone, right? So if you look at the error statement, it says else without a previous if. That's what I was talking about. So the same goes for else if as well. Else if cannot stand alone. An if block must precede it before you can have an else if, and then finally your else. So likewise with the if, this type of statements, you can just have your if and your else ifs. You can actually decide to ignore this if you don't want to do anything if all the conditions fail, right? Okay. So what happens here is that it is going to start from the if statement. So it is going to check if the if statement's condition is true. If it is not true, then it will go and test all of them in the order in which you wrote them. So it will test this as well. If this is true, it will enter and perform just this statement, and then come back after the else and continue execution, right? If none of the else ifs are also true, then it will finally come and execute the else block. But if you don't have any else block, then the program will just continue. So let's see how we'd use this for this example. So if var1 equals 10, printf or print out value is 10. Else if var1 equals, let's say, 40. So we have to use double equal to, not single. So here I'll print out value is 40. So let's put another else if statement there. So let's say if this is equal to 100, this is equal to 100. So we'll put our else condition. So our else condition is when it doesn't match any of the above conditions, right? So I'll just take this out and take that out. So the value is not, I'll just say the value is not listed, right? So since we know that the value of var1 is 10, we know that for this part it is going to run the if statement and execute line 68, right? So the value is 10. That's what we're expecting to see. So let's run this. Oh, sorry, it's var1, not var. So let's run this again and then see our output. So over here we can see, as we expected, the value is 10. So it has just run or executed line 68, right? Because this condition was what was true. So now let's change the value to 40 and then let's see what would happen. So by running this, you can see that the value is 40, exactly what we're expecting, right? So that means the if condition did not pass the test, so it went on to the else if, the first one, and it got a match over here and then executed line 70, right? So let's also change it to a value of 100 and run it. Yeah, so when we run it, we can see that the value is 100, right? And then finally, let's change it to a value that we haven't taken care of because we want the else condition to run. So maybe a value of 1000. So when we run this as well, you can now see that the value is not listed. So I hope the if else makes sense, as well as the if else makes sense, right? So we've also seen this one. So I hope this whole thing makes sense. So you can replay the video and then watch it if you don't get it, or if you can leave a comment and then I'll respond back. I'll respond to those comments. So now we've seen all this. Now let's use our knowledge in this to actually write a functioning program. So I'm going to comment all this out. So comment this side as well, because you know that comments are not going to be executed, right? So in this file we can see that I actually left out our preprocessing directive, sorry, the hash include stdio. So now modern IDEs such as code blocks would automatically insert that file for you if you forget to put it there, but it's not a good practice to forget it, right? So if you look at the warnings over here, you can see that we have implicit declaration of function printf, or it is warning you that you have to include the stdio, right? So code blocks and modern IDEs would insert that file, but it's best practice that you always put it there, because your file might be used by someone who does not have code blocks. Okay, so we have that there. Okay, so let's see the program that will be running, right? Okay, let me just switch to the question view so that you can also see. Sorry. Sorry. So I'm setting this up. This might take a while. Well, just give me a minute. Okay. Okay, so I hope we can see this. So this is a question for which we want to write a program, right? So when the stocks are sold or purchased through a broker, the broker's commission is often computed using a sliding scale that depends on the value of the stock trades. Sorry. So let's say that the broker charges the amount shown in the table below. So under 2,500, his commission is just $30 plus 1.7%. So in between all these ranges, right, we can see these are the corresponding commission rates. Agreed? So now we have to write a program which accepts a value of the user's trade and then calculates the commission that he or she earns. Right? So in programming generally, what we teach or what you would learn is these individual abstract components such as taking input, variables, conditional statements. So it is by experience that you know how to put all this or all these things together to actually write a functioning program. So I would recommend you keep practicing more and more examples. There are many resources on C that you can find and take practical questions and then solve. Okay, so without further talk, let's switch back to code blocks and then start this program, right? So let's look at the question again and see what we are supposed to do. So we can see that this is clearly something dependent on something, or in other words, a condition, because you are seeing that your commission earned depends on the category of sales in this list that you make. So if your transaction is less than 2,500, then this is your commission. Else if it is between 2,500 and 6,250, this is your commission. So you can see that analogy over there. So that's the logic with which we would write the program. So going back to our code blocks, let's start. So first of all, we need to take the user's input, then would pass that input through an if-else statement and then print out the final commission, right? So let's first of all declare the variables we'll be using. So since transaction sizes can include decimal numbers, I'm going to go with a float for the commission. Sorry, for the transaction as well as the commission. I hope this is how to spell commission. Anyways, right, so we would get this transaction is what we use to take input from the user, and the commission is what we use to calculate the actual commission. Okay, so moving on, we'll have our printf statement here. So enter transaction amount to calculate your commission, right? So we need to make an input, hence we use the scanf statement. So because it's a float, I'm just going to use a %f, comma, ampersand transaction, right? So at this point the program is going to run, print out this, and then wait for us to make an input into transaction. So now after this, I know that transaction now has a value, the value being whatever I typed in, and then I can come and write my conditional statements to calculate the commission, right? So now I want to check, the first condition was to check that the transaction was less than 2,500, so we'll start with that. So if transaction is less than 2,500, that means our commission, right, is going to be, so going back to its commission is $30 or 30 plus 1.7% of the transaction, right? So it's going to be equal to 30 plus 1.7f multiplied by the transaction. So arithmetic operations also in use over here. So this program actually encompasses everything that we've done in previous videos. Okay, so else if the transaction. So if we should go back to the questions, right, we can see that here would have a compound condition, because we have to check if it is between 2,500 and 6,250. Right. So if we were to write this mathematically, what would have is something like 2,500 less than transaction less than 6,250. This is how we write it in math. But in programming, we can't write an expression like this. So what we do is we break this into two parts. So the first part is, first of all, 2,500 less than our transaction, and transaction is less than 6,250. So this is how we would write a statement like line 93 in an actual program. So this is an actual program. So you get it, a compound condition. So I can either write 2,500 is less than transaction, or transaction is greater than 2,500. It's actually the same thing. Right, so transaction greater than 2,500 and the transaction is less than 6,250. So if this condition is true, right, what should our commission be? Our commission should be 56 plus 0.66 of the transaction. Right, so commission is equal to 56 plus 0.66f multiplied by the transaction. Right. So I'm just going to repeat this logic for all the rest of the ranges. So the next one is between 6,250 and 20,000. So I'll just copy this block and paste it here and change the parameters. Right, so this is 62,500 to 20,000. Right. So immediately, so okay, let's just add the commission for that. So the commission is 76 plus 0.34. So immediately we can see, there's a problem that exists, right? What if the user entered a value of exactly 2,500? You can see that 2,500 doesn't fit this condition, because the value, it says it should be less than 2,500, and it also doesn't fit the next condition, which is greater than 2,500 and less than 6,250, right? So one thing we can do to remedy is that either on the lower or upper range, instead of using a greater than, I can use greater than or equal to, so that any value immediately after 2,500 is taken care of by this condition. So likewise, I'll do the same to the 6,250. Okay, so now that we've gotten that out of the way, I'll just keep copying the next block. So the next block is greater than 20,000 and less than 50,000. So that has a commission of 100 plus 0.22. Right. And then we have the next one, which is greater than or equal to 50,000 and less than 500,000. So that commission is 155 plus 0.11 multiplied by the transaction. Right. Okay. And then if we look at the last condition, it's actually over 50,000. So you can see that this over 500,000 is actually different from all this. So that means, according to the conditions we have, if we don't match this or match each of these preceding 5, that means we are going to do it over 500,000. So I hope the logic makes sense. So that means this is the last one, is going to be the else part. So if it doesn't fit any of this if or else ifs, then it's going to go to the else part. Okay, so that means this is else. our commission is going to be equal to 255 plus 0.09 multiplied by the transaction, right? So we have our if block, or our if else statement here. That was what we needed for this. So I'll take these comments out. So now that we've calculated our commission, the last thing to do is to actually print it. So we'll print out our commission. So the commission for so our transaction was let's use it 0.2f. So the dollar sign is not a special symbol. I just want to actually print out the dollar sign. Is dollars percentage 0.2f. So since I have two placeholders here, I'll put the transaction as the first variable and then my commission as the second variable, right? Okay, so before you run this program, let's look at one last thing. The first condition says if the transaction is less than 2,500. So that means what happens if I should enter a negative amount? It will also actually assume this condition. So this condition will actually be true for that, and it's going to still calculate. But here, negative or values below 0 is not something I would want to use, right? So before all this, we can put in another if statement there. So if our transaction is less than 0, right, then we want to simply end the program. So we'll print out that transaction must be greater than 0, right? And then I'm going to use the return statement. So return -1. So the return statement, what it's used to do is that anytime the program sees a return statement, it is going to end wherever it is. So that means as soon as the program runs, I type 0 for the transaction, or I type a negative number for the transaction, it's going to print out this and then stop because the return statement is there. Now as for the numbers that we return, it's normally when programs return correctly or when they execute correctly, we tend to return a value of 0. So any other number indicates that something else went wrong or something else happened, and we tend to use the negative numbers to denote errors. So but you can return any value you want. The whole idea that this return statement is there, so it's fine. So I hope we understand this program. It takes a transaction amount, and then using the if or conditional statements, and depending on the category, it computes the commission, right? So now let's run this and then see what we'll get. Right, so we have our printout, enter transaction amount to calculate your commission. So let's see what happens if we enter a negative number like -1 and press enter. So you can see that the transaction must be greater than 0. So this was the statement we had in the first if, and then the process has returned, or in other words the program has stopped. So press any key to continue, right? So that's what we did in this particular statement here. Okay, so let's run the program and actually give it a correct input. So as to the actual values that you should get, you can test with the calculator and then verify that that's what you are getting for each range. So the first one, I'm going to input, let's say 2,400, and then we have this. So the commission for $2,400 is that, right? 4,100 and yeah, that. So we can also test it for the other how do you call it, commission. So let's input one that is greater than 500,000. So let's say we had 600,000. So you can see that as well. So you can verify this with your calculator to see that these are actually the correct values you should be getting. Okay, so in this video we've gone through conditional statements. We saw what if-else structures look like. We've seen simple conditions using relational operators. We've seen forming compound conditions using logical operators. We've also looked at the if-else structure, and then we took an example to culminate what we've learned. So I would recommend you watch this video if you are not if you watch it again if you are not too clear on certain things. If you want to discuss or comment, if you want to discuss anything, you can leave it in the comments and I'll try to respond to each one of them, right? So I'd suggest you go and practice. So you can see here that in this example, in this simple example, we've used concepts that we've learned earlier. We brought all those things together to form a working program. So yes, I'll just encourage you to practice more. And if you have anything that you'd want to discuss, or if you're having any problems or challenges, you can leave it in the comments section and I would get back to you. Okay, so until the next video, I hope you keep practicing, and I'll see you hopefully next time.